And when Jesus told his disciples that they were going to desert him before his crucifixion, it is Peter who spoke up. Okay? Because he's looking at the other disciples saying, look at you, you're just quiet. You're obviously going to run away from Jesus. Because if you want, how come you're quiet? He speaks up with authority, boldly. And he says, even if all these people forsake you, they had not said they were going to forsake him. But he said, even if all these people forsake you, me, Peter, I will never forsake you, even if I have to die with you. Can you imagine? Even if I have to die with you. And Jesus, knowing all things, looked at Peter and thought, my goodness, when is he going to learn? When is Peter going to learn? And told him, do you know that tonight, before the cock crows, you are going to deny me not once, not twice, but 3 times. And we know that he was speaking out of pride. What does Romans chapter 12 and verse 3 tell us? Romans chapter 12 and verse 3 says, for by the grace given me, this is Paul speaking, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the measure of faith that God has given to you. Peter, obviously, the choleric that he is, he thought of himself more highly than he ought to think. He saw himself as much cleverer than Jesus and also cleverer than the other disciples. So we see that with that choleric nature, the downside of it was that Peter spoke before he thought. Because you're going to see how Jesus himself, how God is going to use this same weakness in Peter of being quick to speak for the glory of God once the Holy Spirit comes upon him. But Peter was quick to speak. It's not for nothing that the book of James tells us in James chapter 1 and verse 19 that we should be quick to listen and slow to speak. Quick to listen and slow to speak. Secondly, Peter was fearful, but he hid it with much talking. When you heard the way he talked, you would never know that there was any fear in Peter. He hid it by much talking. So when the disciples saw Jesus walking on the water, Peter quickly spoke. And we find this in Matthew chapter 14, and I'm going to read verses 28 and 29. Matthew chapter 14 and verses 28 and 29. Let me start from verse 25 actually. It says, during the 4th watch of the night, Jesus came out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they cried. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. And mouthy Peter, verse 28, but also brave Peter, ambitious Peter. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Tell me to come to you on the water. I'm sure none of these people will do what I'm doing. But if it's you and you call me, for me, I'm brave. I'm going to walk on the water just like you. Okay? So what does Jesus say? Come. Then Peter got down out of the boat. You might laugh at Peter, but when was the last time you got out of a boat and walked and stood even on the side of a boat in water? When was the last time somebody got out of the boat into the sea? No. Peter, his choleric nature, he got out of the boat and did what? He walked on the water. And Peter goes down in history as the only man other than Jesus Christ who ever walked on water. I've talked about another pastor who tried to walk on water, and it ended very sadly. Ended very sadly because he drowned right in front of his congregation. So here is Peter. He walks out of the water. Verse 30. But when he saw the wind, did brave Peter just say, I'm brave. What is the wind to me? I'm going to walk on this water. No. We are told he was afraid and began to sink. And when he began to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. I wonder how the other disciples viewed that when they were seeing him drowning and yelling and saying, save me. Some of them saying, good for you. Serve you right, huh? The brave man. Just walk on the water some more. Stand up and walk on the water. Isn't it? But Peter, his choleric nature, caused him to obey the Lord. He got out of that water and he walked on that water. But he was fearful. He was fearful. There was fear in him. And we're going to see how that changes when the Holy Spirit comes upon him. All right? We are told the night Jesus was arrested, of course, you've seen how, we see that in Matthew 26:58. We are told Peter followed from a distance. The same one who said, even if all these people run away, for me, I won't, I'm even willing to die with you. We are told from fear, he followed from a distance. And we all know that when he was asked, aren't you one of them? Again, fear filled him. And he said, no. They asked him a second time. He could have analyzed and said the second time, let me just say yes. But because there was fear in him, the second time, he still said yes. He was asked a third time. And this time, his impatient nature came up, his choleric nature. And we are told he said no, and he brought curses upon himself, started swearing and cursing. That is Peter the choleric. So, again in John chapter 20 and verse 19, we are told after Jesus Christ is crucified, the disciples are very fearful, and they go and they lock themselves in a room. We are told the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jews. And Peter was also there, locked up with them.